There's an animal in the Antarctic Ocean whose blood runs clear because it has no red blood cells and no hemoglobin, and it swims anyway. There's a worm at the bottom of the Pacific with no mouth, no stomach, and no anus, and it grows faster than almost anything in the sea. There are stars with no brain, jellies with no heart, urchins that see without a single eye. Every rule you learned about what a body needs, something down there is breaking right now and thriving. And the reason they can is stranger than the absence itself. Start with the star, because the star's the one you think you know. You've seen 100 of them. In tide pools, in touch tanks, dried and varnished on somebody's shelf. And I'd bet most of what you think you know about it is wrong. There's a mussel bed exposed at low tide, somewhere on the Pacific coast of North America, and an ochre sea star is hunting on it. Hunting is the correct word, and I want to defend it before you object. The star has picked out a mussel. It has climbed onto it and wrapped its arms around both halves of the shell, and it's pulling, and it'll keep pulling, with relays of hydraulic feet trading off so that no single foot ever tires for as long as it takes. An hour. 3 hours. Pound for pound, the mussel's one of the strongest animals on the shore, a pair of shells cinched shut by muscle that can hold against the surf itself. And the mussel will lose, and the way it loses is worse than you expect. All the star needs is a gap. Something thinner than a credit card will do, because the star has a very different plan for getting the food to its stomach. It's going to bring its stomach to the food. Through that gap, the sea star slides part of its own stomach out of its body, through its mouth, into the shell, and digests the mussel where it lives. The tissue liquefies inside its own armor. Then the star draws its stomach back in, sated, and lets the empty shells go, and moves on across the bed to choose again. Choose. That word should bother you, because if you were to take this animal apart, right there on the rock, looking for the thing that made the choice, you wouldn't find it. There is no brain in a sea star, not a small brain, not a simple brain, no brain. You can open the central disk and search it under a microscope, and there's no organ there that gathers information and issues commands, nothing that corresponds to the thing behind your eyes that's watching this video. There's a ring of nerves around the mouth and a nerve cord running down each arm, and that's the entire apparatus. No command center, no headquarters, nowhere for the decision to live. And yet a decision plainly got made out there on the rock. There's no getting around that. And that's only the first absence, because while you were in there, you'd notice something else missing. There's no blood, no heart to pump it, no vessels to carry it, nothing red anywhere in the body. The fluid inside a sea star is, to a first approximation, seawater. It runs on the ocean itself, piped directly into its plumbing through a small filtered opening on its back called the madreporite. A sieve plate you can see with your naked eye on the upper surface, slightly off-center, like a manhole cover for the body. So here's the animal we're actually looking at, on that rock, and I want you to hold the full strangeness of it. A predator with no brain to plan the hunt, no blood to fuel the muscles, no heart to drive the blood it doesn't have, hunting armored prey by patience and hydraulics, and outsourcing its stomach into the prey's own shell. Every part of that sentence should have been disqualifying. None of it is. The usual move here is to shrug and say the sea star is simple, and simple things get by on less. That's the assumption to get rid of first, because it's exactly backwards. The sea star is thriving. Sea stars are keystone predators. Remove them from a stretch of coast, and the entire community collapses into a monoculture of mussels. That comes straight out of one of the most famous experiments in the history of ecology, and it's why the phrase keystone species exists at all. The animal with no brain is the one holding the neighborhood together. That's a lot of responsibility for something that can't think, which means we've been asking the wrong question. The one worth asking is what exactly we thought those organs were for. Take the blood first because it's the easier of the two and because the answer sets up everything else in this video. Ask yourself what blood actually does. Strip away the mystique and it's a delivery service. It carries oxygen from a place that has it to places that need it. It carries fuel. It carries waste out. It exists because in a body like yours, thick and dense and warm, almost none of your cells can touch the outside world. Your liver can't breathe on its own. Your brain sits in the dark, 3 layers removed from any air, and if the delivery service stops for 4 minutes, it begins to die. Blood is the answer to one specific problem: cells buried too deep to fend for themselves. Now look at the sea star's body with that in mind. It's flat. It's thin. It's built as 5 arms radiating from a small disc, which is a shape with an enormous amount of surface and very little depth, and its skin is studded with hundreds of tiny finger-like projections, thin-walled pouches, where the internal fluid pushes up against the sea with almost nothing in between. Every part of a sea star is close to the water. Oxygen doesn't need to be trucked in along a highway system because no cell in the body is far from the coast. The seawater circulating through its internal spaces, stirred by hair-like cilia, moves gases and nutrients the short distances they need to go. That's the whole system. There's no pump in it anywhere, and there doesn't need to be. What the sea star has instead is a body plan that cancels the requirement outright. Blood solves the problem of depth, and the sea star declined to have depth. It's a shape answer to a plumbing question, and it doesn't cost the animal a thing to run, but canceling one requirement bought it something stranger, because that same water system, the one standing in for blood, is also standing in for something you'd never guess. It is the muscles. Flip a sea star over, and this is worth doing once in your life, gently, in a tide pool, and you'll see the underside of each arm carpeted with hundreds of translucent tube feet, each one a slender stalk with a flattened tip, all of them waving and stretching and touching down in slow motion. Watch for a minute, and the illusion of randomness dissolves. They're walking. Each foot extends, plants its tip, grips, hauls back, releases, extends again. The grip is partly suction and partly chemistry. An adhesive the foot secretes to stick, and a second secretion to let go, which is why a sea star can anchor itself to rock in surf that would strip you off the shore. And it doesn't grip the way you'd grip. There's no clenching anywhere in it. Here's the part that matters. Each foot's a closed hydraulic unit, connected to a small bulb inside the body. And when the bulb squeezes, water is forced down into the foot, and the foot elongates the way a garden hose stiffens when you open the tap. The animal moves on water pressure. Its skeleton is armor on the outside. Its engine is plumbing on the inside. And the working fluid in that plumbing is filtered ocean. When the star hauled at that muscle for 3 hours without tiring, it was because no individual foot was doing sustained work. Hundreds of feet were trading off in relays, each one a small hydraulic ram, resting between pulls, coordinated into one long, patient, unbeatable siege. Coordinated. There's that problem again. Relays imply a scheduler. A siege implies a general. And we've already opened the disk and found the office empty. So who's running the relays? So now we've got to deal with the real absence. The one that should be fatal and somehow never is. A brain, we assume, is where behavior comes from. Sensors feed in, a decision comes out, the body obeys. That's how you work, more or less. And because it's how you work, it's how you imagine working must be done. One boss, many workers. Every robot we build is built that way. Every organization chart looks like that. The idea that a body could produce coherent, goal-directed, flexible behavior with no central anything sounds less like biology and more like a riddle. The sea star's the riddle, solved, walking around in public. Here's what's actually in there. The nerve ring around the mouth works like a roundabout, a junction where the 5 radial nerve cords meet. Each arm runs its own local operation. Each arm has its own nerve cord, its own sense of touch, its own chemical sensors tasting the water for prey, and at its tip, its own eye. And yes, that's real. And we'll get to it. Because an animal with no brain and 5 eyes isn't a detail you skip. Each arm can process what it senses and act on it locally. No arm reports to a superior. No arm receives orders. There isn't anybody to report to. That's the point. And yet the animal, the whole animal, walks in a definite direction toward food, away from predators, choosing. The way this works, as far as researchers can tell from watching and from experiments, is something like a negotiation. When one arm picks up a strong signal, the scent of a mussel bed, that arm becomes temporarily the leader. Its cord fires in a way the others defer to, and the other 4 arms fall in behind it, their thousands of feet aligning to its heading. Leadership here is a passing condition, and it moves. Rotate the situation. Put the scent on the other side, and a different arm takes over, and the old leader falls in line without complaint because there's no ego to bruise and no throne to vacate. Behavior in this animal emerges from below, from thousands of feet and 5 semi-independent arms, voting continuously with their bodies, and the majority becomes the animal's will. There's no ballot counted anywhere. The counting is the walking. If that sounds too loose to work, watch what it survives. Cut off an arm, an accident, a hungry gull, a boat, and there's no command center to lose, so nothing central is lost. The remaining arms renegotiate and the animal keeps hunting while it slowly regrows what's missing. Some species can regrow almost the entire body from a single arm and a piece of the disc. Try that with an architecture built around a headquarters. Destroy one small region of your brainstem, smaller than a sugar cube, and you stop permanently. No negotiation, no vote. The sea star can't be decapitated because it never had the vulnerability installed. You can't take out the headquarters of a body that never built one. That's the first truly uncomfortable idea in this video, so let me say it plainly. Centralization isn't what intelligence requires. Centralization is one solution, ours, with a catastrophic single point of failure built in, and the ocean is full of animals that took the other road. Now, those eyes. At the tip of each arm, tucked at the base of the terminal tube foot, a sea star carries a small red spot, a cluster of light-sensing units, dozens to a couple of hundred of them, arranged like a very coarse retina. For most of a century, these were dismissed as simple light meters, good for telling up from down. Then researchers, notably a group led by Anders Garm in Copenhagen, actually tested them on reef sea stars that live around coral heads. Take the star off its reef, set it down on open sand a short distance away, and it walks home, reliably, if the reef is close enough to see. Blind it, cover the arm tips, and it wanders at random. The eyes form images, terrible images by your standards, a resolution so coarse the world would be a handful of dark and light blobs, no color in most species tested, and slow. But a coral head against bright sand is exactly a dark blob, and a dark blob's all the animal needs to find its way back to the only landmark that matters. So the sea star sees 5 eyes, at the tips of 5 arms, pointed in 5 directions at once, feeding 5 local nervous systems, no brain anywhere to assemble the picture. There's no place in the animal where the whole panorama exists, and it navigates anyway. Keep that in mind because it's the shape of everything to come. The function survives the loss of the organ we named the function after. Vision without a brain to watch the movie. Decision without a decider, circulation without blood. In every case, we mistook our own architecture for a law of nature, and in every case the requirement turned out to be negotiable if the body and the environment strike the right deal. The Sea Star struck that deal while keeping at least a solid body, armor, and anatomy you can dissect into named parts. It has a stomach, two in fact, one for deploying and one for digesting. It has organs. It just declined the ones that needed a central hub, which raises the next question, the one that pulls us off the rocks and into open water. How far can the deal go? If a body can drop the brain and the blood and still hunt, what's the actual floor? What's the minimum a working animal can carry? There's an animal that has been running that experiment for somewhere north of 500 million years, and you have seen it 100 times, and you have almost certainly filed it in your head as barely alive. It has no brain like the star, but it also has no heart, no blood, no bones, no shell, no head, no dedicated breathing apparatus of any kind. It's roughly 95% water. A biologist would tell you, accurately, that if you took one out of the ocean and left it on the deck of a boat in the sun, it would be gone in hours, simply evaporated, leaving a faint film on the wood. That's it. That's the whole animal, once you take the water back out of it. And this animal's one of the most successful predators the ocean has ever produced. Successful full stop, with no allowance made for its category. There are swarms of them dense enough to stop ships, blooms that stretch for miles, species in every sea on Earth, from the surface to the deep trenches. When ecosystems collapse under fishing pressure and heat, these are the animals that inherit the water. Whatever they're doing, it has outlasted the dinosaurs, the ice ages, and every one of the ocean's mass extinctions. That's a record no fish alive can touch. A jellyfish is what's left when you ask what an animal absolutely can't do without. And you keep crossing things off. And you don't stop where anyone expects you to stop. Look at one properly. In the water, backlit, pulsing, a bell of transparent jelly, a fringe of tentacles, 4 pale loops in the middle that are its reproductive organs, and if you look closely, a set of frilled arms around a central opening. That opening's the mouth. Track the food that goes in, and you find a stomach cavity with channels radiating out through the bell like the spokes of a wheel. Now here's your first test of everything this video has taught you so far. That mouth's also the exit. One opening, both directions. The jellyfish didn't bother with a separate anus, and before you laugh at it, notice that this means it also skipped the entire length of gut, the tubing, the plumbing, the maintenance that you carry between your two openings, 30 feet of it in your case. The jellyfish looked at that expense and declined. It doesn't own a single inch of the tubing you're carrying around right now. How does it get away with declining? The same deal the Sea Star made, pushed further. Nothing in a jellyfish is deep. The animal is built as 2 thin layers of living cells, an outer skin and an inner lining, with the jelly in between, and the jelly, the mesoglea, is mostly water, and mostly not alive. Almost every living cell in a jellyfish is within touching distance of seawater, either the ocean outside or the swallowed ocean circulating through its stomach channels. Oxygen walks in on its own, by diffusion, molecule by molecule. No pump required, because no cell is buried. The heart solves the problem of distance, and the jellyfish, like the star, refused to have distance, and so the heart joined the anus and the gut and the bones on the list of canceled purchases. But the item on that list that should stop you is the brain, again, because this time the animal didn't even keep the Sea Star's 5 semi-independent ARM computers. What a jellyfish has instead is thinner, stranger, and much older. And the reason it deserves your attention is that this diffuse, decentralized wisp of a nervous system turns out to do things that, until embarrassingly recently, scientists would have sworn required a brain by definition. One of those things is sleep. And the experiment that proved it was run by 3 graduate students who noticed something odd about a jellyfish that lies on the floor upside down. The animal is called Cassiopeia, the upside-down jellyfish. It lives in warm, shallow water, mangrove lagoons, seagrass flats, and it has given up swimming as a lifestyle. It settles on the bottom, bell down, arms up, like a jellyfish that fell over and decided it liked the view, and it farms. Its tissues host photosynthetic algae, and it holds its frilled arms up to the sun like a field of crops. Mostly it just sits there, pulsing gently, day and night. It's the least dramatic animal in this whole video, and it's about to break one of biology's firmest rules. Except 3 graduate students at Caltech noticed, not quite the same at night. This was around 2017, and the students, Ravi Nath, Claire Bedbrook, and Michael Abrams, were from 3 different labs. And the question started as something close to a bet, because sleep was supposed to be a brain thing. Every animal known to sleep had a central nervous system. Sleep, in the standard picture, is something a brain does for itself. Housekeeping, memory consolidation, maintenance downtime. No brain, nothing to maintain, no sleep. A jellyfish should no more sleep than a lawn should. So they put Cassiopeia under cameras around the clock and counted pulses. At night, the pulsing dropped by about a third. That alone proves nothing. Plenty of quiet states fall well short of sleep. Sleep has a definition with teeth, 3 tests, worked out over decades so that the word can't be handed out casually. 1. The quiet state must be reversible. An animal in it can be roused, which separates sleep from coma or torpor. 2. It must come with a raised arousal threshold, meaning the animal is measurably slower to respond to a prod while it's in the state. 3, and this is the killer, it must be homeostatic. Deprive the animal of the state, and the animal must pay the state back, must sink into it deeper or sooner, the way you crash after an all-nighter. Debt and repayment. That's the fingerprint of a state the body actually needs. The students ran all 3 tests on an animal with no brain. Reversibility, easy. Drop food in the water at night, and the jellyfish wakes up and gets to work. Arousal, threshold. They lifted the sleeping animals gently off the bottom on a rising platform and then pulled the floor away, and a daytime Cassiopeia reorients and pulses down to the bottom immediately, while a nighttime one drifts, lagging for seconds, like a teenager surfacing through an alarm. And then, the debt. They kept the animals awake, squirting pulses of water at them all night, 10 seconds every 20 minutes, a maddeningly gentle form of harassment, and the next day the jellyfish crashed. Their daytime pulsing sagged. Given a quiet day, they slept it off and returned to normal. Reversible, threshold, rebound. Every box checked in an animal whose entire nervous system's a mesh of cells you couldn't find without a microscope. Look hard at what that does to the standard picture. Sleep turns out to be something wider than a brain doing housekeeping for itself, because here's sleep with no brain in the building. Whatever sleep is truly for, and this is still one of the deepest open questions in biology, the need for it's older than the brain, older than the head, older than the centralized nervous system as an invention. Sleep may be something that neurons themselves require, any neurons, anywhere, even scattered through a wisp of jelly on a lagoon floor. Our sleep's the borrowed thing here. Theirs came first, so what's this mesh that needs its rest? The jellyfish nervous system is called a nerve net, and the name is honest. Through those 2 thin layers of living tissue runs a web of interconnected nerve cells, spread out, roughly uniform, no clumps you could point to and call a center. Signals spread outward across the net from wherever they start, like the ring of ripples from a stone. Touch a tentacle, and the contraction radiates. In the swimming bell, A loose ring-like arrangement of this net coordinates the pulse so that the bell squeezes as one thing and not as a chaos of twitches. Sensors, processing, and command are one fabric here, everywhere at once. A fabric like that ought to be clumsy. And here the jellyfish files its second surprise. Because the pulsing of that brainless bell is, by the measures that matter to an animal, close to the most efficient swimming ever recorded. Researchers who study animal locomotion keep finding, to their visible irritation, that the moon jelly gets more distance per unit of energy than the elite fish they compare it to. Part of the trick is that the jellyfish recovers energy from the water it just pushed. As the bell relaxes, it does so elastically. No muscle needed for the recoil, and the swirling water it shed on the power stroke curls back in and gives the animal a free shove from behind. The jelly borrows from the ocean, stroke after stroke, and pays almost nothing back. An animal that's 95% seawater moving through seawater has almost no weight to carry, no temperature to maintain, no brain to feed, and a gait that recycles its own wake. Now the cost side of that ledger, because there's always a cost side. A body this cheap can't chase anything. The nerve net is fast enough to coordinate a pulse, but the animal has no throat to sprint with, no fins to corner with, and mostly, it doesn't try. Its hunting strategy is to be a drifting minefield. The tentacles trail through the water studded with millions of stinging cells, each one a coiled harpoon in a pressurized capsule, triggered by touch and chemistry, firing in less than a millionth of a second, among the fastest mechanical events known in any animal. Nothing about that requires a decision. Prey blunders in. Prey is harpooned, paralyzed, and reeled to the mouth by tentacles that handle the whole transaction locally. The jellyfish doesn't need to know dinner has arrived. Its arms take care of it, and the news, such as it is, spreads through the net at its own pace. There's no hurry, because there's nobody waiting to be told. There's one more canceled purchase on the jellyfish's receipt, and it's the one that turns this animal from a curiosity into a warning. It has no gills, no lungs, obviously, but no gills either, no dedicated breathing surface of any kind, because a body 2 cell layers thick is a breathing surface, all of it, everywhere. And that turns out to matter enormously right now in this century, because of what's happening to the ocean's oxygen. Fertilizer running off the world's farmland feeds coastal algae blooms. The blooms die and rot. The rotting consumes oxygen. And the result is dead zones, stretches of sea where the water holds too little oxygen for gilled animals to live. And there are hundreds of them now, some the size of small countries. Fish flee a dead zone or suffocate in it, because a gill's a high-performance organ with high-performance demands. A jellyfish drifts in and keeps hunting. Its skin-breathing, low-burn body needs so little oxygen that water lethal to a mackerel is merely quiet to a moon jelly, and there are measurements suggesting some jellies go further still, holding a reserve of oxygen dissolved in the jelly of the bell itself, a built-in dive tank drawn down during forays into the worst water. Remember the claim at the top of this section, that when ecosystems collapse, these animals inherit the water. This is the mechanism of the inheritance. The jellyfish wins on simplicity in exactly the dimension where the damaged ocean now punishes complexity. The animal that declined the equipment can't be bankrupted by the bill. You could stop there and have a tidy story. The jellyfish as a beautiful automaton, a minefield with a gate, no more aware of the world than a mousetrap. That was comfortably the story for a long time. Then look at the box jellyfish, and the story comes apart in your hands. Box jellies are the ones with the lethal reputation, the pale cubic bells in warm coastal water whose stings put people in hospitals. Set the venom aside. The strange part is arranged around the rim of the bell, at 4 points, where a small stalked structure hangs down like a tiny pendulum. There are 4 of these structures, and each one carries 6 eyes. And I mean eyes, because 2 of the 6 on each pendulum have a cornea, a lens, and a retina, the same basic camera design as the eye you're watching this with. Count it. 24 eyes on an animal with no brain. That's a literal count made on a real animal, and the word eyes is doing full duty in it. That's a real number attached to a real body, and it forces a question that sounds like a joke and is not. Who's looking? A camera eye is an expensive instrument. It collects an image, and an image is a torrent of information. And information is only worth collecting if something processes it. We have just spent several minutes establishing that a jellyfish has nothing to process with beyond a mesh of a few thousand nerve cells. Building 24 eyes on top of that seems like installing an observatory on a rowboat. Researchers, Anders Garm again among them, working with Dan Erik Nilsson at Lund in Sweden, spent years on a small Caribbean box jelly called Tripedalia that lives in mangrove lagoons. And what they found is the most satisfying piece of biology in this entire video. The answer is that the eyes were designed so that almost no processing is needed. Start with a detail that looks like a flaw. When Nilsson's group measured the optics of the box jelly's camera eyes, the lenses turned out to be excellent, sharp, well-made, and focused on a point beyond the retina. The image lands blurred, permanently, structurally blurred, in every individual, in the same way. In any animal we built our expectations on, that's a defect. In the box jelly, it's clearly the design. And once you ask what a blurred image is good for, the design starts talking to you. Blur is a filter. It erases small, fast, fussy detail, ripples, sparkles, drifting specks, the visual noise that would flood a tiny nervous system, and it keeps only the large, slow, high-contrast shapes of the world. The dark mass of a mangrove root, the bright opening of the lagoon, the edge where shadow meets sun. The eye is refusing detail on purpose, optically for free, before a single nerve cell has to spend anything, because the lens itself is doing what a brain would otherwise have to do, deciding what doesn't matter. Each of the 4 pendulums hangs with a heavy crystal at its base, so gravity keeps it oriented no matter how the bell tilts, and each pendulum carries its 6 eyes aimed at fixed angles. One of the camera eyes on each pendulum is permanently aimed straight up, through the surface. That eye watches the sky, or rather the compressed circle of sky that physics paints on the underside of the water. And in a mangrove lagoon, the thing silhouetted against that circle is the canopy. The researchers showed with animals in tanks and some careful staging of artificial canopies that Tripedalia uses that upward view to know where it is. Drift too far from the trees, out toward open water where the copepods it eats are scarce and its own predators are not, and the canopy shrinks toward the edge of that bright circle, and the animal turns and swims back toward the trees. Take the canopy away entirely, and it swims in confused circles. It's using the sky as a map, and it's reading that map with an eye that never once points anywhere else. 4 eyes watch the sky. Others watch down and out at their own fixed angles, each tuned to its own narrow question. Am I near the roots? Am I about to hit something? Is it getting dark? There's no viewer for those 24 eyes to feed. What the box jelly has is 24 instruments, each hardwired toward the bell's pacemakers, each answering its single question directly with steering, the way a thermostat answers a temperature without ever seeing the room. The seeing is real. The images are real. There's simply no theater in which they're watched, and it turns out the theater was never the necessary part. I told you to keep the Sea Star's lesson in mind, that the function survives the organ. Here it's again, sharpened. Vision, it turns out, is a bundle of separate questions, And if your world is simple enough, and your eyes are matched precisely enough to your world, each question can be answered by a reflex. The box jelly sees the way a lock recognizes a key, and then, in 2023, even that tidy version turned out to be too small, because a group including GARM published experiments showing that these animals learn. The setup was elegant. In their home lagoons, box jellies dodge mangrove roots, judging distance by contrast, dark root against bright water. Contrast, though, changes with the water. On a murky day, a root looks fainter and therefore farther than it is. The researchers put jellies in a tank with a striped wall. Stripes deliberately faint, low contrast, calibrated to look farther away than the wall really was. At first, the animals behaved exactly as their hardwiring dictated. They misjudged and bumped the wall again and again. Then, within minutes, within a handful of collisions, the bumping stopped. The animals began turning earlier, pulsing away sooner, treating faint stripes as near obstacles. They had connected two streams of experience, the look of the wall and the impact of hitting it, and recalibrated the reflex. That's associative learning, the same fundamental category as a dog learning what a leash means, performed by a few thousand nerve cells hanging off an eye stalk with no brain to store the lesson in. They'd learned something, and there's nowhere in that animal for the lesson to live. Where is the memory kept? In the net itself, presumably, in changed connections near the eyes, but nobody can yet point to the place. And I want to keep that honest edge visible. This result is new, the mechanism still poorly understood, and it has quietly rewritten the entry requirements for learning. The list of things we were sure needed a brain is now shorter by one more item, and the trend of this video should be making you nervous about the rest of the list. So a brainless animal can sleep, learn, navigate by the sky, and swim more efficiently than a salmon. The jellyfish and the sea star both played the same opening. Keep the senses, keep the behavior, delete the headquarters. Which sets up the next deletion perfectly because it's the mirror image. What happens if an animal deletes the other end? Keep the processing, such as it is. Delete the eye itself, all of them, every lens, every retina, every eye spot, gone. Can a body see with nothing? There's an animal that appears to, and you have stepped around it in shallow water, and it's essentially a walking ball of spikes with no face at all. The sea urchin. Take one apart and the inventory reads like a dare. No brain. In keeping with the family tradition, it's an echinoderm, cousin to the sea star, same nerve ring, same radial cords. But where the star at least carries those 5 red eye spots at its arm tips, the urchin has nothing. Researchers have combed the surface of these animals for anything resembling an eye spot, a patch of dedicated visual tissue, and there's nothing to find. If eyes are where seeing happens, the urchin is as blind as a stone. That's the reasonable conclusion. It's also wrong. Then someone tests one, and the stone flinches at shadows. This has been known in outline for a long time. Long-spined urchins on a reef react to a shape passing overhead, aiming their spines at it, tracking it. A bristling swivel that follows you as you swim over. Some shallow water species do something odder and almost endearing. They dress. Collector urchins pick up shells, pebbles, and drifting debris with their tube feet and hold the collection on top of themselves like a hat. And when researchers take the hats away, the urchins promptly rebuild them. And they rebuild them fastest under bright light, which is the tell. The best supported reading is that the covering is shade. Portable protection against damaging wavelengths pouring into clear, shallow water. Which means an animal with no eyes isn't only detecting light, but managing its exposure, budgeting sunlight with a wardrobe. Others, tested in tanks, do something more demanding. Put an urchin in a brightly lit arena with a dark disc on one wall. roughly the size of a predator or a sheltering crevice, and some species will walk toward it, reliably, from across the tank. Make the disc smaller, below a certain visual angle, and the response dissolves. The animals wander as if the disc weren't there. That size threshold's the giveaway. Reacting to overall brightness requires no vision. Plenty of animals with bare light-sensitive skin can flinch at a dimming, but responding to a dark shape only when it's large enough, and knowing which direction it lies in, requires resolving the shape against its background, and resolving is the definition of image vision. Something in this eyeless animal is resolving. The genome pointed to where. When the purple sea urchin's genome was sequenced in 2006, the gene catalog turned up a surprise. The urchin carries the standard toolkit for building photoreceptors, opsins, the light-catching proteins your own retina runs on, and plenty of them. The follow-up work found where those proteins actually sit, and the location caught everyone off guard. They were in the tube feet. The urchin's hundreds of hydraulic feet, the same walking gear it shares with the sea star, are studded with light-sensitive cells, scattered across the whole surface of the animal, pointing in every direction at once. Light sensors alone fall short of vision. A camera with no housing sees only fog. An image needs direction, each sensor sampling its own narrow slice of the world, which is what a lens or a pinhole is for. The urchin has neither, and this is where the hypothesis becomes almost insolent in its cleverness. The urchin's body may be the housing, the spines. Each photoreceptor sits down among the forest of spines, and the spines around it screen off light from most directions, leaving each sensor a narrow cone of sky and water it alone surveys. Sensor by sensor, cone by cone, the animal's entire surface becomes one spherical, inside-out compound eye, with the animal living in the middle of its own retina. Dense spined species should therefore see more sharply than sparse-spined ones, and in the species tested so far that prediction has, roughly, held. The measured resolution tracks the geometry of the spines about as well as the hypothesis needs it to. It's a strange idea, and it's holding up better than it has any right to. I need to keep the edges honest here, because this is a live debate and not a settled fact. What's solidly established? The photoreceptors are real, the genes are real, the shape-directed behavior is real in the species where it has been carefully tested, and the measured acuity is coarse, very coarse, an image built of patches tens of degrees wide, which would make an urchin's world a mosaic of a few dozen smudges. Nobody claims an urchin sees your face. It's closer to knowing that something large and dark is over there, and roughly where there is. What remains argued about is the middle of the story, whether the spine screening geometry is truly what generates the directionality, whether every reported behavior is genuine spatial vision or, in some species, a subtler kind of light comparing that stops short of it. And above all, how a nerve ring with no brain stitches thousands of scattered readings into a single decision about which way to walk. That last question matters enormously. It may be the same question the box jelly forced on us, answered the same way, with many hardwired little answers in place of one assembled picture. Or it may be something new. The experiments are brutally hard, because you can't ask an urchin what it sees. You can only build arenas and count where it walks. And urchins are under no obligation to be interested in your arena. So the honest summary is, the eyeless animal passes tests that normally certify vision by a mechanism that's probably its whole body, integrated by nobody knows exactly what. Some researchers in this field describe the animal, in print, as one giant eye. Others wince at the phrase. That disagreement's the current state of knowledge, and I'd rather hand it to you disagreeing than pretend it's finished. Either way, notice what has happened to our inventory of necessities. The sea star deleted the brain and the blood and kept hunting. The jellyfish deleted the heart on top of that and kept sleeping and learning. The urchin deleted the eye itself and kept At minimum, a working sense of shape and direction. Organ after organ, the pattern repeats. What we call an organ is a package, a bundle of functions gathered into one address, and the package is optional even when the functions are not. The functions can be unbundled, smeared across a whole body, delegated to geometry, to spines, to plumbing, to physics. But every animal so far has something in common that should bother a careful viewer. None of them ever had the missing organ. No sea star ancestor carried a brain that was later abandoned. The echinoderms and the jellies branched away from our line before those headquarters were ever built. Their absences are old, original. It's one thing never to have bought the equipment. It's something else entirely to have owned it, depended on it, built your whole nervous system around it, and then let it rot. That's a different kind of absence, an absence with a history, and it's where this story stops being about strange, distant phyla and starts creeping up our own family tree. Because the ocean holds a vertebrate, an animal on our side of the Great Divide, with a skull, a spinal cord, and an actual brain. That's in the middle of exactly that process. It has eyes. They're buried. The hagfish is, by broad agreement, one of the least lovable animals in the sea, and I intend to change your mind about it in the next few minutes. Picture an eel-shaped animal, pink-gray, up to a couple of feet long, living on and in the mud of the continental shelves and the deep sea floor, in the dark, all over the world. It has a skull but no jaws, a mouth like a slot flanked by fleshy barbels, and inside that slot a tongue-like plate carrying rows of keratin teeth that rasp flesh by folding and pulling. It's been running, that lineage, in more or less this shape, for something on the order of 300 million years. There are fossil hagfish older than the dinosaurs that a modern zoologist would recognize at a glance. Whatever this animal is doing, it stopped needing improvement a very long time ago. That's a hard thing to say about any animal, and the fossils back it up. Now look for its eyes, and you'll understand why it belongs in this video. There are eyes, or the remains of them, small pale structures under the skin, and in some species not even under thin skin buried beneath a patch of translucent tissue you have to know to look for, and in others, sunk deeper still under muscle. Dissect one out, and it's a sobering object. No lens, no iris, no focusing apparatus. A retina reduced to a simplified layered patch, wired to a brain whose visual regions are correspondingly modest. It is the memory of an eye, an organ walking backward, and the animal can't see images with it. At best, it may register the difference between light and dark, and it lives where there's no light to register. For a long time, there was a genuine scientific argument about which direction this organ was walking. Hagfish sit so close to the base of the vertebrate family tree that one school held their simple eyes were primitive, a snapshot of vision before vision finished evolving, eyes on the way up. The other school held they were degenerate, full vertebrate eyes on the way down, dismantled by disuse. That argument mattered, because if hagfish eyes were primitive, they were a window into how our own eyes were built. The weight of evidence, from molecular family trees showing hagfish and lampreys as close cousins, lampreys having excellent camera eyes, and from fossil relatives that appear to show proper eyes in the lineage, has swung firmly toward degeneration. The hagfish's ancestors could see. The modern animal has spent millions of years unseeing, letting mutation and neglect eat an organ that cost energy and returned nothing in a world of permanent night and buried food. Unseeing sounds like decline until you watch what replaced it. A hagfish finds a whale carcass on an abyssal plain in blackness. From a distance, faster than almost anything else arrives. It reads the water. The barbels around its mouth and the skin itself are dense with chemical and touch sensors. A plume of decay drifting with the current is, to a hagfish, a lit road. And when it arrives, it does the thing that made it famous, and the thing everyone laughs at until they understand it, and then they stop laughing. Threatened or grabbed, a hagfish releases slime. The word undersells it the way calling a jellyfish 95% water undersells it. From rows of glands along its flanks, the animal releases a small quantity of white secretion, and within a fraction of a second that secretion, meeting seawater, expands by roughly 10,000 times into a bucket's worth of transparent, fibrous, clinging gel. The mechanism's a real piece of material science. The glands package protein threads, each thread wound into a tight skein like a microscopic ball of yarn, alongside mucous vesicles. And on contact with seawater, the vesicles swell, and the skeins unravel, threads finer than spider silk and inches long. And the mixture whips itself into a fabric that's mostly nothing, a gel more dilute than any other known animal secretion, holding a shape while being barely more than organized water. You can't really call it mucus. There's nothing else in the animal kingdom quite like it. Ask what the slime is for, and the answer explains the whole animal. A shark bites a hagfish, and the slime floods the shark's mouth and gills. Gills are the one thing a fish can't barricade. They must stay open to the water, or the fish suffocates, and the slime clogs them on contact. There's footage from baited deep cameras of sharks striking hagfish and recoiling, gagging, shaking their heads like a man who has bitten into a wasp, while the hagfish swims on, unhurried. It then does something almost contemptuous. To clean itself, it ties its own body into an overhand knot and slides the knot from head to tail, scraping off its own weapon. The knot earns its keep twice over. The same trick gives it leverage, jawless. It braces the knot against a carcass to tear mouthfuls loose, a substitute for the bite force it never had. And the carcass is where the hagfish reveals its most quietly radical talent, the one that ties it to every gutless animal in the rest of this video. A hagfish doesn't only eat with its mouth, it burrows bodily into the carrion, submerging itself in the one place in the deep sea where nutrients are effectively infinite, and its skin drinks. Experiments have shown hagfish skin and gills absorbing dissolved nutrients, amino acids, directly from the surrounding broth across the body surface, the way a marine worm or a mussel's gill might. A vertebrate, our own architecture, with skin that eats. The animal is, for those hours, inside its meal, feeding through its surface like something far older than a vertebrate has any business acting. It's eating with its skin, and it's doing it while lying inside its own dinner. So tally the hagfish honestly. Eyes, canceled, in progress. Savings redirected into chemistry and touch, jaws, never owned, replaced by a knot and a rasp. Stomach acid of the burning vertebrate kind, even a true stomach. Hagfish digestion is oddly gentle, and their gut runs without the acidified chamber yours depends on. And it thrives in numbers that beggar belief. Trawl surveys in some soft-bottom regions pull up more hagfish than any other fish. And when a carcass hits the bottom, they're the cleanup crew for a good share of the deep sea. The hagfish teaches the lesson the first three animals could not. Absence isn't always ancient. Sometimes you can catch it happening. Bodies hold on to organs the way a company holds on to a subscription. An organ is a running expense, audited every generation. And when the world stops paying for it, it goes. So here's the coldest audit in the ocean, and the strangest result of it, because the next animal lost something deeper than an organ. It lost a molecule, the one molecule biology textbooks treat as synonymous with being alive, and it's the reason there's a fish in the Antarctic whose blood is as clear as gin. The story surfaces first among whalers. In the early 20th century, men working the flensing platforms of South Georgia, a glaciated island in the far South Atlantic, occasionally hauled up a fish that was wrong. Pale, big-headed, huge-jawed, with wide, toothy mouths that got them called crocodile fish, and when you cut one, it didn't bleed red. The wound welled whitish, translucent, like watery milk. The gills, which in every proper fish are the brightest red tissue in the body, were pale as veal. Ghost fish, white-blooded fish, the whalers said, and science mostly filed it under sailors' talk, because what they were describing wasn't supposed to be able to exist. You can't have a vertebrate without red blood. That was the rule everybody was working from. It took until 1954 for the claim to be nailed down, when a Norwegian physiologist named Johan Ruud obtained fresh specimens and published in the journal Nature a paper whose title carries the whole shock in 6 words: vertebrates without erythrocytes and blood pigment. No red blood cells, no hemoglobin, absent in the fullest sense of the word. You need to feel the size of that. Hemoglobin sits deeper than any organ. It's the molecule, the iron cord protein that grabs oxygen in the gills or lungs and hands it out to the tissues, and it's everywhere. Worms have hemoglobins. Clams have them. Some bacteria carry relatives of them. Every vertebrate on Earth, every fish, frog, snake, bird, whale, and human runs on the stuff, which is why blood is red from sharks to sparrows. It is, as far as anyone knew, the one non-negotiable item in the vertebrate contract. Your body is so committed to it that it keeps a quarter of your bone marrow busy, making 2 million new red cells every second. And when the supply slips even slightly, you feel it as anemia. And when it fails, you die. The ice fishes, a family of Antarctic species called the Channichthyeids, 16 or so of them, tore up the contract. Their blood's a clear plasma with a scatter of white cells in it, carrying oxygen the only way left, dissolved in the liquid itself, the way fizz is dissolved in soda water. That method is terrible. Dissolved in plasma, blood carries somewhere around 1/10 of the oxygen that hemoglobin-loaded blood manages. Run those numbers on any normal fish, and it suffocates. The ice fish gets away with it, and the way it stays alive is a masterclass in how many other things a body can rearrange to cover for a single catastrophic absence. First, the setting, because the setting made everything else possible. The Southern Ocean around Antarctica is among the coldest seawater on the planet, sitting near 28.5 degrees Fahrenheit, below the freezing point of ordinary blood, which is its own problem, and the ice fish's relatives solved it with anti-freeze proteins that lock onto ice crystals and stop them growing. Cold water is cruel to most life, but it gives one gift: gases dissolve better in cold liquid. Frigid Antarctic water is rich in oxygen, the richest on Earth, and cold tissue burns fuel slowly, so demand falls as supply rises. The gap a body must bridge between the oxygen outside and the oxygen needed inside is narrower there than anywhere else in the sea. That's the one break the ice fish got, and it's the reason any of the rest of it works. Narrower, but not closed. And the ice fish closes it by brute rearrangement. Its heart, and this is the detail I find hardest to get over, is enormous, proportionally several times the size of a red-blooded relative's, and it pumps a blood volume 2 to 4 times larger through vessels that are themselves wide-bored, a low-pressure, high-flow design with the hydraulics of a slow, wide river. Since each drop carries little, the animal moves many more drops. Its capillaries are unusually dense in critical tissues. It has no scales, and its skin is threaded with vessels that take up oxygen directly from the water, so the whole body surface moonlights as a gill. Some species even carry oversized gill surfaces on top of that. Watch the whole redesign at once, and you see the strategy. The ice fish can't enrich its blood, so it turned itself into a pipeline, maximizing flow, minimizing distance, letting the cold ocean's abundance seep in through every available square inch, and the molecule itself is gone past any hope of recovery. When researchers went into the icefish genome to find the hemoglobin genes, expecting broken versions, pseudogenes, the molecular equivalent of a boarded-up house, they found, for the main adult gene, essentially nothing, deleted. A scrap of one related gene remains, a fragment, like a foundation stone left in a field, and the rest of the locus is simply gone. On top of that, several icefish species have separately lost myoglobin, hemoglobin's cousin, that stores oxygen inside heart and muscle tissue, the pigment that makes red meat red. There are icefish whose hearts are cream-colored. The deletions happened millions of years ago, and the family has been radiating through Antarctic waters ever since, some species cruising mid-water, some lying on the bottom, some among the most abundant fish on their shelf. This is a successful family of predators, eating krill and fish, growing to a couple of feet, sustaining fisheries, all of it on blood you could read this script through. If you want the measure of that success in a single scene, there's one, and it's recent. In 2021, a German research vessel working the Weddell Sea, the ice-choked bay in Antarctica's Crook, was towing a camera sled across the seafloor half a mile down when the monitors filled with nests. Circular depressions in the mud, each about 2 feet across, swept clean, each guarded by a single icefish crouched over a mass of eggs. Then another nest. Then another. The nests continued, one every few yards for the entire camera run, and the next run, and the next. And when the team, led by Autumn Purser, mapped the extent and published it, their estimate was on the order of 60 million active nests, spread across an area of seafloor the size of a city, the largest fish breeding colony ever discovered on Earth, by orders of magnitude. 60 million ghost-blooded fathers, each fanning eggs in water at the freezing point, in the dark, under the ice. The fish that biology's rulebook says shouldn't exist is holding, on the bottom of the coldest sea, one of the great gatherings of vertebrate life on the planet. And they'd found it by accident, towing a camera through the dark. Here's where the icefish earns its place in this video's argument, though, and the point is sharper than survival against the odds. Every animal so far dropped an organ, and we found underneath an elegant reason, a body plan that made the organ redundant, a geometry that replaced it. The icefish may be different. The icefish may be the absence that shouldn't have happened. Because when physiologists actually measure the icefish solution, it doesn't look elegant, it looks expensive. That giant heart consumes a startling share of the animal's energy budget just to shove all that dilute blood around, by some estimates several times the pumping cost, relative to metabolism, that a red-blooded fish pays. The wide vessels, the extra blood volume, the dense capillaries, the naked oxygen-drinking skin, all of it's compensation, and compensation is never free. Two respected researchers in this field, Bruce Seidel and Kristen O'Brien, after years of work on these animals, published a review of the evidence whose title tells you where they landed: When Bad Things Happen to Good Fish. Their argument, in short, is that losing hemoglobin was probably a mutation, a catastrophic one, that happened to occur in the single environment on Earth, forgiving enough not to punish it, cold, oxygen-soaked, and at the time, notably empty of competitors after episodes of extinction had cleared the Antarctic shelf. Anywhere else in the ocean, the first hemoglobin-free fish would have died as an embryo. There, it lived, badly, and then its descendants spent millions of years papering over the defect with bigger hearts and wider pipes until the patch job became the body plan. Not every researcher tells it that grimly. There are arguments that thin, pigment-free blood flows more easily at freezing temperatures, where red cell-thickened blood turns to sludge, so the loss may have carried a real hydraulic benefit alongside its costs, and the truth's probably a tangle of both. That debate stays open. What nobody disputes is the dependency it created. The icefish solution works if, and only if, the water stays cold and saturated. Warm the Southern Ocean by a few degrees, and the arithmetic that spared them starts to reverse, oxygen leaving the water precisely as their tissues demand more, with no hemoglobin to fall back on and no way, ever, to get it back. Deletion is final. The gene is gone. Evolution doesn't keep backups. So the icefish adds a hard, cold clause to our running lesson. Sometimes absence is an accident that the environment chose to tolerate, and the body that carries, it's a negotiated settlement. Brilliant patches over an ancient wound, thriving on conditions it must now pray will hold. When you read a missing organ, sometimes you're reading what its world, at one soft moment in deep time, was willing to forgive. Keep that idea. It's the hinge of everything still to come. And now let it escalate, because so far, every absence has been permanent, ancient, or accidental, written into the lineage. The next animal treats absence as something else entirely. It treats absence as a Tuesday. There's a sea slug in the Western Pacific, a small green and cream animal called Elysia, an inch or so of frilled elegance grazing on algae in shallow water, that can lose its entire body and carry on. And I mean the entire body, not the lizard's bargain of a spare tail. The head on its own, alive, crawling, separates from everything behind the neck. The heart, the digestive gland, the reproductive organs, essentially the complete contents of the animal, amounting to more than 4/5 of its weight, left behind in one piece like a suit of clothes stepped out of. The discovery was, as these things often are, an accident of housekeeping. Sayaka Mito, a doctoral student in Yoichi Yusa's lab at Nara Women's University in Japan, was raising sea slugs, and one day in the tanks, she found a head. Just a head, cleanly separated behind the neck. No ragged wound, no predator in the tank, no explanation. And the head was alive. It was crawling. It turned. It moved around the tank. Within hours it was feeding, pressing its mouth to algae and grazing. A head the size of a fingernail clipping, dragging no body whatsoever. Eating a meal it had no stomach to send the food to. It's grazing. With nothing attached. You should be asking the blood question, because you have been trained by this entire video to ask it. The heart was in the body, left behind on the far side of the tank, and for the record, that abandoned body was alive too, its heart visibly beating. And it would keep beating for days and in some cases months, responding to touch, a complete slug in every respect except the one that mattered. But stay with the head. A head with no heart has no circulation. Everything this video has established says that Trick belongs to flat animals, thin animals, bodies built as film and mesh. And a slug's head, dense with brain and muscle, is none of those things. It should have hours at most. It regrew the slug. Within a day, the wound at the neck had sealed. Within about a week, in young animals, a new heart was beating inside a budding torso. In roughly 3 weeks, in Mito and Yusa's published observations, the head had rebuilt everything. Heart, digestive gland, reproductive organs, the complete body, and the animal went back to its life as if the whole episode were routine. Older slugs' heads survived the separation but couldn't complete the regrowth. There are limits, and the limits are honest ones, and the lab documented both. Some individuals did the whole thing twice. That's twice in one lifetime, from the neck up. 2 questions then, and they have different kinds of answers. How does the head survive weeks without a circulatory system? And why on earth would an animal keep a self-decapitation feature installed? The survival answers the strangest single fact in this video so far, and it's green. Elysia is a sacoglossan, one of the so-called solar-powered sea slugs, and its party trick long predates the decapitation discovery. When it eats algae, it doesn't digest everything. It punctures the algal cells and, with surgical selectivity, keeps the chloroplasts, the tiny green engines that run photosynthesis, and installs them, intact and functioning, in the cells lining its own branch digestive gland, a gland that ramifies through its body and up into the very tissues of its head and its wing-like flanks. The stolen engines keep running, inside the animal. For weeks or months, depending on the species, the slug's own cells host captured plant machinery that turns sunlight into sugar, which is why the animal is leaf green, and why some of these species can go months without a meal, and why a severed head with no gut and no heart isn't actually as unprovisioned as it looks. It's photosynthesizing. The head that steps out of its body walks away wearing a solar panel, and the current best reading of the evidence is that this is precisely what buys it the weeks it needs to rebuild: low demands, sunlight income, and stored green capital in its tissues. I owe you the honest edges here too, because this corner of biology's still hotly contested. How the slug keeps stolen chloroplasts alive for months, organelles that in the alga depended constantly on support from an algal nucleus the slug didn't take, is still argued about. Early claims that the slug had absorbed algal genes into its own genome have been challenged by later sequencing, and the mechanism remains at best half understood. Even the word photosynthesizing gets debated at conferences, some researchers preferring to describe the chloroplasts as slowly discharging batteries. And why decapitate at all? Mito and Yusa noticed that many of the self-severing slugs were infested, their bodies riddled with a parasitic copepod, a crustacean squatter that castrates and consumes them from inside, and the heads that walked away were leaving the infestation behind, trading a whole body for a clean start, which the head could afford because of the solar panel. That explanation is elegant, and it fits the data they had. It's also, as they themselves framed it, a hypothesis, built on a pattern in a lab, and alternatives have been suggested. The observation is rock solid. The why's still soft, and I'd rather you hold it that way. For this video, though, look at what Elysia does to our theme, because it bends it into a new shape. Every previous animal either never had the organ or lost it over evolutionary time. Elysia treats organs as removable. The heart, the gut, the works, jettisoned in an afternoon and rebuilt in a month because the animal has arranged an outside power source that covers the gap. Absence, the Gethemats for this slug, is a maneuver it can perform at will. And the outside power source is the detail to keep, because it's the bridge to the deepest version of this story. The slug can afford to lose its digestive system temporarily because something else, stolen plant machinery, is feeding its cells directly. Now push that logic to its limit. What if the arrangement weren't temporary? What if the outside power source were so reliable, so permanent, that the digestive system never needed to come back? An animal that has handed the entire business of eating, digestion, the works, to a partner, and simply deleted the equipment? To find that animal, you have to leave the sunlit water entirely. Down past the last blue glow, a mile and a half down, to the places where the planet's crust is torn. In 1977, a small research submersible named Alvin was diving on the Galapagos Rift, a volcanic seam in the eastern Pacific Sea floor, on an expedition that wasn't looking for animals at all. The scientists aboard were geologists and chemists, hunting for hydrothermal vents, hot springs on the deep sea floor that theory said should exist and no one had ever seen. 8,000 feet down, in water 2 degrees above freezing, in permanent blackness, their lights found the vents, shimmering columns of hot, mineral-charged water rising out of fractured basalt. That alone would have made the expedition historic. But around the vents, where every map of how life works said there should be nothing but a thin scatter of scavengers, there was a metropolis. Clams the size of dinner plates, packed in drifts. Crabs, pale and blind, swarming, mats of white filaments over every surface. And rising above all of it, the animals nobody could even categorize at first glance. Forests of white tubes, some of them 6, 8 feet tall, swaying, and from the top of each tube, a plume of brilliant scarlet, feathery, retracting in a blink when a crab came too close. They didn't have a name for any of it. The biologists who eventually got specimens, Meredith Jones at the Smithsonian, among the first to formally describe the giant tube worm, Riftia pachyptila, opened one up and hit a wall that will sound, by now, familiar, but push it further than anything in this video has pushed it. No mouth, no stomach, no gut, no anus, none of it, in any reduced or simplified form. An adult Riftia, an animal that can stand taller than a man, that builds crowded thickets of thousands of individuals, that grows faster than almost any invertebrate in the sea, has no opening anywhere on its body through which food could enter, and no tube inside along which food could pass. The plume's a gill, laced with blood, real red blood, hemoglobin richer than yours. The icefish's missing molecule here in extravagant excess, a detail worth savoring. A heart drives that blood through real vessels, so the delivery system is deluxe. There's simply no cafeteria, nothing comes aboard. The animal is sealed. There's no way in, and there's no way through. And where the digestive system ought to be, filling most of the body cavity, the dissections found an organ nobody had a name for, a large, soft, spongy mass, brown-green, that under the microscope turned out to be packed gram after gram with billions upon billions of bacteria. Living bacteria in a purpose-built organ, in the middle of a healthy animal. For a few years, that organ, the trophosome, was an open riddle. The animal was plainly rich, growing, fat with protein, in a place with no sunlight, no plants, and no meaningful rain of food from above. The money was coming from somewhere, and every conventional account failed. The person who read it correctly was a graduate student, sitting in a lecture. Her name is Colleen Cavanaugh. In the late 1970s, she was a young researcher at Harvard, and the story, as it has been told and retold in the field, is that she was in a seminar about the tube worms, listening to a description of the puzzle, the sealed body, the mysterious organ full of bacteria, the sulfur crystals someone had found precipitated in the trophosome tissue, when she stood up and said, in effect, the bacteria are the answer. The worm doesn't need a mouth because the bacteria are feeding it from inside. They must be using the sulfide. She was a graduate student in a room full of people who'd been stuck on this for years. Here's the idea she was proposing, and it was, at the time, close to heresy. Every food chain anyone had ever traced ran back to sunlight. Plants and algae capture solar energy, everything else eats them or eats each other, and even the deep sea, the standard model said, lives on the thin drizzle of dead material sinking from the lit world above. Cavanaugh was proposing a second economy, running on a different currency entirely. Hydrogen sulfide, the rotten egg gas dissolved in vent fluid, poison to most animal life, is to certain bacteria fuel. They can strip energy from it by oxidizing it, the way your cells strip energy from sugar, and use that energy to build sugars from carbon dioxide, exactly what plants do with light. Chemosynthesis instead of photosynthesis, no sun required. A food chain rooted in the chemistry of the planet's own interior. She was right, and the proof came from enzyme assays and microscopy on trophosome tissue, her landmark paper landing in Science in 1981, and the finding didn't just solve the worm. It rewrote the rules for where life can exist, on this planet, and by extension anywhere, because it cut the assumed cord between life and sunlight. But stay with the worm, because the worm is our story, and the closer you look at the arrangement, the more radical it gets. The arrangement goes far past hosting helpful bacteria the way your gut hosts flora. Your gut bacteria assist your digestion. The worm has no digestion to assist. The bacteria, packed into the trophosm at densities reaching billions per gram of tissue, are the entire food supply. They fix carbon into organic molecules, and the worm lives by harvesting them, absorbing what they leak and, the evidence indicates, digesting bacteria themselves in ongoing controlled culls. The trophosm is the farm, and the pantry and the kitchen installed where the stomach used to be. It's a food supply the worm grows inside its own body, but feeding the farm is the worm's job, and the logistics are vicious. The bacteria need 3 ingredients simultaneously: sulfide, rising from below in vent fluid, oxygen, drifting past in cold seawater, and carbon dioxide. The vicious part is that sulfide and oxygen barely coexist, react with each other spontaneously, and worse, sulfide's a poison that shuts down animal respiration by binding to the same molecular machinery oxygen uses, which is precisely why most animals can't live where the worm lives. The worm's solution is that scarlet plume and the blood behind it. Riftia hemoglobin's a monster molecule, and it carries oxygen and sulfide at the same time, at separate binding sites, keeping the 2 reactive cargoes chemically gloved so they can't touch, and holding the sulfide harmlessly away from the worm's own tissues until delivery deep in the trophosm, where the bacteria take it. The plume is the intake, spread into the turbulent seam where vent fluid swirls into seawater, breathing in both worlds at once. The blood's an armored courier service. The trophosm's the customer. The worm has turned its entire body into the supply chain for its own internal ecosystem. And the punchline? The detail that makes Riftia the perfect escalation for this video. The missing gut isn't ancient. A larval Riftia has a mouth. It has a functional little digestive tract, like any respectable worm larva, and it uses that mouth, in its first days of settled life, for exactly one meal that matters. It swallows its future partners, acquiring the right sulfide-oxidizing bacteria from the environment, in an infection-like colonization that the young worm survives and manages. And then, with the partnership sealed inside, the metamorphosing worm closes its own mouth. The digestive tract degenerates, is resorbed, unbuilt. The adult's absence is a renovation, performed once per lifetime, the moment the outside food source becomes forever unnecessary. The animal keeps the equipment exactly as long as the requirement exists, and not one day longer. You won't find a cleaner demonstration anywhere in nature of the principle this whole video has been circling. The organ tracks the need. Need gone. Organ gone. What does the arrangement buy? At a healthy vent where sulfide is rich, Riftia grows at rates measured among the fastest of any marine invertebrate, colonizing fresh volcanic seafloor and building 6-foot tubes within a couple of years, reproducing in dense white thickets that anchor a whole food web of crabs, fish, shrimp, and grazers, an oasis economy in the abyss. The price is the same one the icefish pays. Total dependency on a local condition. Vents are mortal. The plumbing shifts, the fluid stops, and when the sulfide quits, the entire oasis dies in place. Thickets of empty white tubes standing in the dark like an abandoned town. Riftia's answer is reproductive. Flood the ocean with larvae perpetually, so that when new seafloor tears open somewhere along the ridge, the colonists arrive within months. The species lives like a flame, jumping between wicks. It's a beautiful way to live, and a nervous one. Now you might file all of this under Extremophile exotica, a one-off arrangement possible only in the strangest habitat on Earth. And for years, that was a defensible reading. Then researchers started finding gutless animals in places with no vents at all. Off the island of Elba, in the Mediterranean, In bright, shallow water where tourists swim, there's ordinary-looking sand near seagrass meadows, and in that sand lives a worm called Olavius algarvensis. It is nothing to look at. A pale thread, an inch or so long, thin as fishing line, a member of the oligochaetes, the same respectable family as the earthworm in your garden. Its relatives are tube and gut animals to their core. An earthworm is practically nothing but digestive tract with a modest wrapper. Olavius has no mouth, no gut, no anus. The entire alimentary canal, the defining infrastructure of its whole family, deleted. And then, the detail that moves this animal past even Riftia. It has no excretory organs either. The nephridia, the little kidney-like units that worm-kind uses to filter wastes, standard equipment segment by segment and its relatives, are gone too. Intake deleted, exhaust deleted. The animal is sealed at both ends of its metabolism, a closed tube of muscle in the sand. And it's doing that in sand you could stand in. Underwater, you could swim in. A body like that goes well past missing organs. It is missing the two conversations every animal body holds with the world, eating and excreting, and the explanation lives, again, just under the skin. Beneath the worm's cuticle, between its body wall cells, researchers found dense layered communities of symbiotic bacteria, and when a team led by Nicole Dubilier, now at the Max Planck Institute for Marine Microbiology in Bremen, worked out who the bacteria were and what they were doing, the answer turned out to be a whole consortium. At least 4 or 5 distinct kinds of bacteria, stably present generation after generation. Some are sulfide oxidizers, Riftia's kind of partner, burning sulfide for energy and fixing carbon. Others are sulfate reducers, bacteria that run the reaction in the opposite direction, producing sulfide as their waste. Read that again, because the loop it implies is the whole beauty of the animal. One resident burns sulfide and needs it supplied. Its neighbor exhales sulfide as exhaust. The worm's own microbes feed each other's chemistry, cycling sulfur back and forth inside the body, squeezing usable energy out of the traffic, which is how the community survives in plain Mediterranean sand where sulfide is scarce. Nothing like the roaring chemical rivers of a vent. The consortium can also, the genomic and biochemical work indicates, run on alternative fuels, hydrogen, even carbon monoxide, dissolved in the pore water, and pass carbon and nitrogen around among its members, a diversified little utility company with redundant suppliers. The worm commutes vertically through the sand, a few inches down toward the sulfidic depths, back up toward the oxygenated surface layers, and by shuttling between chemical zones, it feeds whichever member of the consortium is hungry for what that layer offers. Riftia is a farmer with one crop. This animal's a landlord running a small industrial district. And the missing kidneys? The bacteria again. The worm's nitrogen wastes, the ammonia and urea an animal must normally flush out or die, get eaten instead, taken up by the symbionts as raw material, nitrogen being scarce and precious in that sand, recycled into fresh bacterial protein, which the worm then harvests. The waste stream became a supply line, so the exhaust plumbing became dead weight, so the exhaust plumbing went. Nothing in this animal is a loophole. It is the same law we've watched all video, applied twice at once, and it produced a garden variety worm in swimming distance water, running the same closed economy body plan as the most alien animal of the abyss. At this point, you may have quietly consoled yourself with a thought. All of this is happening out on the weird branches of the tree, jellies and stars and worms and one frostbitten fish family, while the animals you actually picture when you hear the word animal, the mainstream, keep their full set of equipment. It's a comforting thought, and the ocean doesn't honor it, because one of the organs in this video's title has been quietly abandoned by a huge slice of the most mainstream animals on Earth, and almost nobody outside the field seems to know it. The stomach. The stomach specifically, as distinct from the gut as a whole, and it's worth being precise about what a stomach is, because the word gets used loosely for the whole midsection, and the real thing's a much more particular machine. A true stomach is an acid chamber, a muscular bag at the front of the gut whose lining pumps out hydrochloric acid strong enough to dissolve zinc, plus enzymes that only wake up at that seething acidity, and its jobs are to melt protein into workable pieces, to crack open cells, and to sterilize incoming food, an acid moat against the bacteria riding in on every mouthful. It's ancient vertebrate equipment, older than Jaws' dominance of the seas, and you carry one. And it's useful equipment, which is why the next number lands so strangely. Somewhere between a fifth and a quarter of all the world's fish species do without one. Absent, the same flavor of absent as everything else in this video. The acid chamber gone, the front of the gut running straight from throat to intestine at a mild, blood-like neutrality. And these aren't obscure fish. Wrasses, the busy painted fish of every coral reef, stomachless. Most of the carp family, thousands of species strong, stomachless, pufferfish, countless gobies and their relatives, the zebrafish, arguably the most studied fish on the planet, sitting in tens of thousands of laboratory tanks, has no stomach, a fact that still catches biology students off guard. And reaching further back, the chimeras, the deep-water ghost sharks, whose lineage split from other fish hundreds of millions of years ago, manage without one too, as do lungfish. Stomach loss has happened over and over, independently, in lineage after lineage, at least a dozen and probably many more separate times, which is evolution's way of telling you it's no accident. Repeated independent loss means repeated independent audits, all returning the same verdict. This organ, for this animal, isn't worth what it costs. So what makes a stomach not worth it? Follow the acid, because the acid's the expense. Pumping protons to hold a bag of your own tissue at battery acidity costs real energy around the clock, and it demands a specialized lining and a mucus defense so the bag doesn't digest itself. And everyone who has felt heartburn knows the system runs close to its own edge. Now feed that system the diet of a wrasse or a carp, shellfish, snails, coral-dwelling invertebrates, crunched up along with their shells, or mouthfuls of sediment and algae taken more or less continuously all day. Two problems. Shell is calcium carbonate, which is antacid, the literal active ingredient of the tablets in your medicine cabinet. A stomach trying to acidify a meal of crushed shell is trying to acidify its own neutralizer, swallowing the antidote with every bite. And continuous grazing defeats the stomach's other purpose, which is storage between infrequent meals. An animal nibbling all day has no gaps to bridge. For a fish in that way of life, the acid chamber becomes a furnace that's always lit, always being quenched, guarding against gaps that never come. Many of these fish grind food instead with pharyngeal teeth, a second set of jaws in the throat, mill it fine, and run it straight into an intestine that does the chemistry at neutrality. The diet actively canceled the requirement, and here the genome delivers the detail that connects this beat to the icefish and sharpens the whole video's argument. Researchers who compared the gene catalogs of stomachless fishes, a line of work associated with, among others, the comparative genomicist Felipe Castro and colleagues, found that in lineage after stomachless lineage, the specialist genes of the stomach, the pepsin family of acid-tuned enzymes, the molecular proton pump that acidifies the chamber, are wrecked or gone, decayed into fragments or vanished outright. The same boarded-up house genetics as the icefish's hemoglobin locus, different lineages, different wreckage, same signature. Once a lineage has spent long enough without a stomach for those genes to rot, the option is closed. No stomachless lineage has ever been shown to rebuild one, and the geneticist's reading is blunt. The blueprints are destroyed. Biologists have a name for this one-way quality, Dallow's law. The observation that complex structures, once lost, don't come back the same way. Absence, at the genetic level, is a demolition. You can't undemolish a house. Hold the two halves of this beat together, and you get the coldest, clearest statement yet of the rule. We keep meeting. An organ is a subscription, paid in energy every single day, reviewed by selection every single generation, and a quarter of all fish looked at the stomach subscription and, in their circumstances, let it lapse. And the cancellation was permanent. You have a stomach because your ancestors' way of eating, big, occasional, protein-heavy, contaminated meals, kept renewing the subscription every generation, without a gap long enough for the genes to rot. The organ chart you learned in school isn't a parts list for animal life. It is a bill your particular lineage happens to still be paying, which finally clears the way for the question this entire video has been descending toward. If every organ is negotiable, if brain and heart and blood and eyes and stomach and kidneys have each, somewhere in the sea, been individually canceled, then what happens at the bottom of the ledger? Is there an animal that canceled everything? No organs? Not one. No brain or nerves at all, no muscle, no mouth, no gut, no heart, no vessels, not even a fixed left and right. And if such an animal exists, is it, as every instinct insists it must be, some barely alive crust clinging to the edge of existence? It exists. You have one in your bathroom, or at least the plastic effigy of one, and the real animal's one of the most successful body plans in the history of life. It has been running continuously for at least 600 million years, through every catastrophe the planet has thrown: 5 mass extinctions, snowball glaciations, asteroid winters, ocean acidifications, and it constitutes today, on some measures, one of the dominant animal presences on the seafloor from the tropics to the poles. It's the sponge, and the next few minutes are going to be spent taking apart the most drastic underestimate in the popular understanding of animals, because a sponge is a machine, an enormous, coordinated, self-repairing machine that happens to be built without a single one of the components this video began by calling necessary. Start with what a sponge actually is, physically, because almost nobody has been told. It is an animal, unambiguously, many cells, no cell walls. It develops from an embryo. It's more closely related to you than anything else in this script except the fishes. But its body is organized on a principle unlike anything we have run into yet. There are no organs, because there are no tissues in the strict sense, no sheets of committed cells sealed into permanent specialties. Instead, a sponge is a water processing plant built of a few cooperating cell types, and the plant's entire architecture is plumbing. The outside is perforated with thousands of microscopic intake pores. The inside's a labyrinth of canals, widening and branching, walled in places with chambers, and every chamber is lined with the cell that makes the whole phylum work. And that cell deserves a slow look because it's doing 4 organs worth of work by itself. The cell is called a chonocyte, a collar cell. Picture a cell with a single long whip, a flagellum, rising from its surface, and around the base of the whip, a delicate collar of fine finger-like projections arranged in a ring like a tiny picket fence. The whip beats continuously, day and night, and its beating drags water through the collar. And the collar's pickets are spaced so finely that they comb the water as it passes, snagging bacteria, stray cells, fragments, even viruses, particles far too small for almost any other animal's feeding gear. Each captured particle is swallowed by the cell itself, engulfed and digested inside it, or handed off to wandering neighbor cells for processing. One chonocyte is a pump, a filter, a mouth, and a stomach, at a scale of thousandths of a millimeter. A sponge is that multiplied. A single modest sponge contains millions upon millions of chonocytes, arrayed in their chambers like galleries of oarsmen, all beating, and their combined effort turns the animal into a current. Water is drawn in through the myriad skin pores, driven through the narrowing labyrinth, combed clean in the chambers, and expelled, filtered, through the big chimney vents you can see on any sponge, the oscula, in a jet strong enough to feel with your hand on a large individual. You can watch it happen with a squirt of dye in the water. There's nothing subtle about the current a sponge makes. The numbers on this are the first shock of the beat. Sponges are, per unit of body, among the most powerful filterers in the sea. A healthy sponge can pass its own body volume in seconds to minutes, and over a day, many thousands of times its own volume, and it captures bacteria-sized particles with efficiencies routinely measured above 90%. Scale that up from one sponge to a seafloor of them, and the plumbing becomes planetary. On tropical reefs, sponge communities filter staggering volumes of the water column, stripping it of dissolved and particulate organic matter, and returning the carbon to the reef food web in edible form, a recycling loop that helps explain how riotously rich reefs persist in nutrient-poor water, in the fjords, and on the continental shelves of the cold north, and on Antarctic bottoms where sponges dominate whole landscapes. The same is true in slower motion. The animal with no organs is a load-bearing component of the ocean's metabolism, and the pumping is subtler than brute rowing. Sponge architecture exploits physics that human engineers would sign off on. The intake pores sit low, in slow boundary layer water. The osculum rises on a chimney into faster ambient current, and moving water, by the same principle that lifts an airplane wing, has lower pressure, so the chimney's top sits in suction. The sponge's shape alone, parked in a current, drives flow through its body for free, before a single flagellum spends anything. Some deep-sea glass sponges appear to run largely on this induced flow, farming the current itself. The body is the plant, and part of the power supply at the same time. Hold the sponge against the checklist now and be thorough, because this is the floor of the ledger, the full statement of what an animal can decline. No mouth, 10,000 micromouths instead, none of them an organ. No stomach. Digestion is intracellular, each cell its own gut, the way our single-celled ancestors did it before animals existed. No heart, no blood, no vessels. The pumped seawater's the circulation, delivering oxygen and food to every cell directly, the sea star's trick taken to completion. No gills or lungs. The same water as the breath. No kidneys. Wastes diffuse into the outflow, and the jet carries them away, the plumbing serving as exhaust. No brain, and this time not even the consolation prize. No nerve net, no neurons, not one nerve cell in the entire body. A distinction that puts the sponge below even the jellyfish on the scale we have been descending. No muscles either. No contractile tissue of the committed kind. No eyes. No sensory organs of any description. And a detail that's easy to miss and worth a pause. No symmetry. Nearly every other animal on Earth is built on an axis, radial like the jelly and the star, or mirrored left and right like you and the fish and the worms. A sponge has no axis, no front, no back, no plan of that kind at all. It is shaped by where it grew, by current and rock and neighbors, the way a tree or a coral head is. The last common notion of what an animal's body must be, that it must have a layout, is canceled here too. What a sponge does have is a skeleton, and even that's strange in an instructive way. Through the sponge's soft body is scattered a reinforcement of mineral splinters called spicules, glass in most lineages, literally silica, biological glass, spun by cells into needles, crosses, stars, grappling hooks, shapes so precise and so various that spicules alone can identify a species. In the glass sponges of the deep, the family that will close this beat, the splinters fuse into continuous lattices, scaffolds of woven glass fiber of an intricacy that materials scientists study covetously. towers engineered against buckling by an animal with no engineer, no brain, no nerves, and no cell that has ever seen the whole structure. Which brings the question this animal was built to force. With no nervous system whatsoever, a sponge should be incapable of behavior. Behavior is the nervous system's product. That has been the working assumption since the study of animals began. The sponge sits, the sponge pumps, the sponge is scenery. That's the reputation. The reputation is wrong, and the proof has been accumulating from two directions at once. The first is the sponge's answer to an everyday emergency: sediment. A storm stirs the bottom. Silt clouds the water. And for a filtering animal, silt is strangulation, clogging the chambers, fouling the collars, gumming the entire plant. An animal with nerves would stop pumping. Sponges stop pumping. Filmed in time-lapse, which is the only way to see most sponge behavior, an irritated sponge performs a slow, unmistakable, coordinated act that researchers who study it with evident delight call sneezing. Over the course of 20 minutes to an hour, the whole body contracts, canals narrowing in sequence, and then relaxes, expelling backed-up water and waste. In some species filmed in recent work, the sponge first floods its own surface with mucus, herds the trapped dirt along defined mucus highways toward collection points, and then casts the dirty sheet off entirely. A house cleaning performed in beautiful slow motion by an animal with nothing to coordinate it, except something plainly is coordinating it. The contraction travels. It moves across the body as a wave, cell to cell, neighborhood to neighborhood, a signal propagating through an animal that owns no wires. Something's telling the whole body to stop at once. We just can't see what. The second direction is stranger, because it turns out one branch of the sponges reinvented something we were sure belonged to nervous systems alone: the electrical impulse. Glass sponges, the deepwater lineage with the fused skeletons, have a body organized around a peculiarity possessed by no other animal. Much of their living tissue is syncytial, meaning the cell walls between neighbors are absent, and vast reaches of the body share one continuous cytoplasm, a single vast multinucleated web of living matter draped over the glass scaffold. And through that continuous web, researchers, notably Sally Lees and colleagues working on glass sponges of the British Columbia fjords, demonstrated something remarkable: a true electrical impulse, a propagating wave of charge, akin in kind to your nerve impulses, though built on different ion channels and vastly slower, crawling through the tissue at a fraction of an inch per second. Give the sponge's body an electrical shock, or foul its water with sediment, and the impulse sweeps the syncytium and the flagella stop everywhere. The whole pumping plant shutting down within moments, and all stations emergency broadcast in an animal with no stations. The sponge has, in this lineage, the underlying trick of a nervous system without any of the hardware, a propagating electrical signal, implemented without neurons at all, running on bare shared cytoplasm. And when biologists finally read a sponge genome, in 2010, the punchline had one more turn in it. Scattered through the sponge's DNA are recognizable versions of many of the genes that, in your head, build the synapse, the signaling junction between neurons, the components of the receiving apparatus, present and expressed in an animal that has no synapses, no neurons, and never will. The parts list for a nervous system, or a good fraction of it, predates the nervous system. So the sponge is holding the components without ever building the assembly, which means the assembly, the brain itself, came later, one thing that got built in some lineages out of parts already lying around, because certain ways of living started demanding it. Certain ways of living. That distinction between what a way of life demands and what life itself demands is the whole video, and the sponge is its proof. And there's one more sponge story that closes the case so cleanly, it's almost suspicious. In 1907, a zoologist named H.V. Wilson, working on the coast of North Carolina, did to a sponge the most disrespectful thing you can do to an animal. He took a living sponge, a red encrusting species from the local shallows, and he pushed it through a sieve. Fine bolting cloth, the mesh silk used for sifting flour, with pores far smaller than any sponge structure. What came out the other side had stopped being a sponge in any sense the word can carry. It was a red cloud, a suspension of separated cells, and small clumps drifting apart in the dish of seawater, the animal reduced to its particles, disassembled past the point where the word body could apply. By every reasonable standard, this went well past wounding. Wilson had abolished the animal. The clouds settled onto the bottom of the dish, and then the particles began to crawl. Sponge cells can move, amoeba style, groping over surfaces, and Wilson watched the scattered cells wander, touch, stick, and gather, clump finding clump. And over the following days, the clumps organized. Pores appeared. Canals tunneled through. Choanocytes assembled themselves into chambers and set their collars spinning. And within a matter of weeks, there were functioning young sponges in the dish, pumping and feeding, rebuilt from the cloud. Reassembly, in the fullest sense of the word. There was no plan preserved to heal back toward. The architecture had been destroyed completely, and the cells built a new one, negotiating it among themselves, each cell knowing only its neighbors, none knowing the whole. There's no blueprint anywhere in that dish. There's only the cells, and whatever they'll agree to. Wilson went further, because a good experimentalist always goes further. He sieved 2 different sponge species, different colors, into the same dish and stirred the clouds together. The cells sorted. Red found red, yellow found yellow, the mixed haze resolving itself into separate camps that each rebuilt their own kind. A century later, this experiment still run in university classrooms, and it still does to students what it should now be doing to you, which is to quietly detonate the idea that a body is a thing. For a sponge, a body is an agreement, a standing arrangement among a population of semi-independent cells, dissolvable and renegotiable, and the animal survives the total loss of its anatomy because the cells, all along, were the animal. The body's just the current deal. Nothing else in this video can do that. Grind a fish through a sieve and you have made soup. The fish's cells surrendered their independence long ago in exchange for the performance that organs buy. And this is the honest way to hold the sponge in your mind, as an animal holding the other end of a bargain that everything else in this script has been negotiating piece by piece. Organs are a trade. A lineage trades away its cells' independence, welds them into fixed, committed, interdependent machinery. And in exchange, it gets speed, pursuit, vision, appetite, everything a muscle-cracking sea star or a lunging ice fish needs. The sponge kept the independence and declined the machinery, and its way of life is precisely the one where that's the winning trade. Attached, patient, processing the water that comes, in an ocean that has reliably kept coming for 600 million years. I should mark one live dispute here, in keeping with this video's habit of showing you the edges. Whether sponges are truly the oldest branch of the animal family tree, the closest living picture of the first animals, or whether that position belongs to the comb jellies, with sponges branching later, is a genuine, unresolved, occasionally bad-tempered argument among evolutionary biologists, turning on hard problems in reading very old genomes. On the older, traditional reading, the sponge's organless state is original, the baseline everything else elaborated from. On the rival reading, it becomes possible that the sponge lineage once had more, nerves even, and shed them, which would make the sponge the most comprehensive cancellation in the whole ledger. I find it telling that the science can't yet tell those two stories apart, because it means the 2 categories this video has been playing with never had and gave up, blur together at the very base of the animal kingdom. Either way, the working sponge in front of us is the same machine, and the lesson stands. But the sponge has one more card to play, and it's my favorite in the whole deck, because it's the sponge's own trip through this video's logic. Everything I've told you about sponges, the pores, the canals, the beating collars, the whole water processing identity is summed up in the phrase filter feeder. Filtering is what a sponge is. The body plan is the filter is the body plan. There's no sponge without the pump. Every textbook says so. Deep in the world's oceans, and in one drowned cave in the Mediterranean, there are sponges that gave it up. The cave discovery came first in the 1990s. In a flooded sea cave near La Ciotat, on the French Mediterranean coast, a cave whose inner chambers hold still, cold, food-poor water that mimics deep-sea conditions a few yards from shore, researchers led by the sponge biologist Jean Vaslet found a small, unassuming sponge that, on close examination, had no choanocytes and no plumbing at all. No pores, no canals, no pump. In their place, the animal's surface was covered in fine filaments, and the filaments were dressed, along their length, with microscopic hooked spicules. Glass grappling hooks by the million, facing outward like the pile of a carnivorous Velcro. Small crustaceans, the little swimming shrimp-like animals that blunder through every seawater cave, brush a filament and are caught, held fast by the hooks. And then the sponge does the only thing available to an animal with no mouth at any scale. Its cells migrate to the prey. Over hours and days, sponge cells crawl out, spread over the struggling animal, engulf it piecemeal, and digest it cell by cell, each cell taking its share, until the shell is empty. A sponge that hunts. The paper announcing it ran in Nature under a title that, like Rude's, needed only to state the fact: a carnivorous sponge. That's a phrase that shouldn't work. It's two words that cancel each other out. And there it was, in the water, catching shrimp. At the time it looked like a freak. One cave, one species. It turned out to be a preview. As deep-sea exploration accelerated, carnivorous sponges turned up on abyssal plains and seamounts all over the world. A whole family of them. Well over 100 species now described, and they aren't rare down there. On some deep bottoms, they're the characteristic sponges. The most famous is the one that made headlines when researchers at the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute described it in 2012. The harp sponge, Chondrocladia lyra, found more than 2 miles down off California. An animal of terrible elegance, rows of upright translucent strings rising from horizontal runners like the strings of a lyre planted in the mud, every string a snare line dressed in hooks. The whole animal, a field of vertical fishing lines strung to windward of the current, harvesting the tiny swimmers of the abyssal night. Ask why, and the answer's the purest statement of this video's law that the ocean has ever produced. Because this time, the environment reached past the incidental organs and canceled the defining one. Filtering pays only if the water carries enough microscopic food to be worth pumping, and pumping isn't free. The flagella burn fuel around the clock, and the deep sea, far from the sunlit production of the surface, is the most food-dilute habitat on the planet. Down there, the arithmetic of the collar cell fails. Water too lean to justify the cost of moving it. So the requirement that built the sponge body plan, process large volumes cheaply, lapsed, and with it went the entire apparatus: choanocytes, canals, pores, the works, in the same way the ice fish shed hemoglobin and the wrasses shed the stomach. What remained was a sponge-grade toolkit, crawling cells, spicule glasswork, patience, and selection reassembled those parts around the food that does exist in the deep. A sparse traffic of small animals, worth catching one at a time and worth digesting slowly. The sieve became a snare. That's the same animal, in the same phylum, running a completely different business. The filter feeder, the animal whose very phylum is named for its pores, gave up its pores and thrives. If you want a single image to carry out of this video, it might honestly be that one. Strings of glass hooks in the dark, 2 miles down, belonging to an animal that abandoned the one feature its entire lineage is defined by, because the deep sea stopped stocking what the feature was for, which is the thought that has been assembling itself piece by piece underneath every animal in this script, and it's time to say it outright. We started this video asking how these animals survive their absences, as if each missing organ were a handicap heroically overcome. Then, animal by animal, the question kept inverting on us, and by now you can feel the true shape of it. The absences are information. Every missing organ in this script is a readable record, a sentence written in negative space, and what it records is something about the world. Specifically, it records a demand that the environment once made, or might have made, and then stopped making, or never made at all. An organ is the shape of a requirement. An absence is the shape of a requirement that was canceled. Go back down the ledger and read each entry that way, and watch every animal in this video snap into a sharper focus. The sea star and the jellyfish carry no brain and read as records. Their bodies say, "Nothing in our way of life has ever demanded speed of decision." A drifting minefield doesn't need to decide faster than the prey that blunders into it. A hydraulic siege engine that wins by patience doesn't need a headquarters. Headquarters are for wars fought in seconds. The brain, wherever it evolved, is a receipt for a particular demand, the demand that an animal outrun and outguess its world in real time. And the bodies of the brainless are affidavits that enormous, successful, half-billion-year careers are available in the ocean to animals whose world never once asked them to hurry their thinking. The urchin carries no eyes, and its whole prickly surface answers instead. And the record there reads, "This animal's world demanded only coarse questions of light. Where is the looming shape? Which way is the dark?" It never demanded faces, never demanded detail, and so the expensive instrument that answers fine questions was never commissioned, and the coarse questions got answered by geometry, by the standing spines themselves. And the hagfish, with its eyes sunk beneath its skin like windows bricked over, is the same sentence in a different tense. Its ancestors' world demanded sight and paid for it, and then the lineage moved somewhere the demand couldn't follow, into mud and depth and permanent night, and generation by generation the unclaimed subscription lapsed. The hagfish eye is a record of a world going dark, kept in flesh, the way tree rings keep a record of drought. It's history, written by subtraction. The icefish's clear blood is the coldest entry and the most precisely dated, because the record is genetic and geological at once. Hemoglobin is a receipt for a demand almost every environment makes, the demand that blood carry more oxygen than water can hold in plain solution. The Southern Ocean, as Antarctica froze, and its circumpolar current sealed it into refrigeration, became the one environment on Earth that withdrew the demand, gorging its water with oxygen, while chilling every metabolism that lived there down to a crawl, and into that one open window of forgiveness. A mutation fell and stuck. The stub of the vanished gene, still legible in the icefish genome next to the empty place where its partner used to be, is a timestamp. It marks, in molecular wreckage, the era when the bottom of the world changed its terms. The fish's transparent blood is Antarctic history, written in absence, running in its veins. The stomachless fishes read the same way, thousands of independent entries all recording the same environmental clause. A diet that arrives continuously, pre-buffered with shell. Defeats the case for an acid chamber. every wrasse on every reef is carrying a receipt for the reef itself, for a world of armored, alkaline, always available food. And your stomach, since we're reading records now, is a receipt too, for the opposite world, the one your lineage ate its way through, meals that were occasional, large, soft, protein-dense, and dirty. The organ in your abdomen is a fossil of a feeding pattern, still being paid for, still being renewed, because your world, unlike the wrasses, never withdrew the demand. The tube worm's sealed mouth records the reliability of a vent. That's worth an astonished pause, because vents are, on human timescales, unreliable, violent, temporary. But to the worm's body, reliability means the span of one life in one spot. And Aryphtia settled at a fresh vent lives its entire fast life inside a plume of guaranteed chemistry. The larva keeps its mouth precisely as long as the guarantee is unsigned. The moment the bacterial contract is sealed inside its body, the guarantee takes effect, and the mouth, that ancient, universal, defining piece of animal equipment, is unbuilt as surplus. The adult worm's smooth, openingless body is a record of a promise. Sulfide will flow for as long as you live. And the dead white thickets on exhausted vents are the record of the promise expiring, kept honestly, in the same ledger. Olavius, the little gutless worm in the Elba sand, carries the most detailed record of all, because its absences itemize the environment down to its chemistry. No mouth and no gut. Food in that sand doesn't come in swallowable form. It comes as dissolved chemistry harvestable only by bacteria, so the demand for a container to put meals in was never made. No kidneys, nitrogen in that sand is too scarce to throw away. So the demand for exhaust plumbing reversed itself entirely. Waste became too valuable to excrete, and the organ whose whole purpose was disposal became a liability. You can reconstruct that worm's neighborhood, its pore water, its scarcities, its vertical chemical layers, from nothing but the list of what the worm declined to build. The body is a map of the sand, drawn in omissions, and the sponges, at the floor of the ledger, hold the master record. The ordinary sponge's total absence of organs records the oldest and gentlest demand structure the animal kingdom has ever operated under. Stay put, and the water will bring everything, forever. No pursuit demanded, so no muscle. No decision demanded, so no nerve. No distance inside the body, so no blood, no heart, no lungs. The whole roster of organs that the rest of the animal kingdom invented is, read from the sponge's side of the ledger, a list of emergencies the sponge never had. Each organ elsewhere a receipt for some new hardship, speed, scarcity, depth, distance, competition, that some other lineage's environment began demanding, and the sponge's reliable current never did. And the carnivorous sponges are the ledger's proof of principle, the entry that shows even the foundational clause can be struck. When the deep sea withdrew, the one demand the sponge body plan was built to meet, the plan itself was canceled, hooks strung where the pores had been, and the phylum simply continued, unbothered, on new terms. Read this way: the ocean stops being a gallery of oddities and becomes something closer to an archive. Every body in it, every body that has ever been in it, is a stack of receipts, organs for demands in force, absences for demands canceled or never issued. Nothing is missing from any of these animals. Missing is the wrong category. Calling a sea star a fish with the blood left out makes about as much sense as calling a cave a house with the walls left out. Each body is exactly the size of its world's demands, no smaller. And this is the part we consistently fail to appreciate, no larger. That is the discipline the ledger enforces and never relaxes. Nothing is kept that isn't paid for. Not one organ, anywhere in the sea, is retained for sentiment, for heritage, for the memory of what the lineage used to be, or for the possibility of someday needing it again. The hagfish won't be keeping its eyes in case the lights come back. The icefish couldn't reclaim hemoglobin if the Southern Ocean boiled. The ledger holds current accounts and nothing else, and it audits them every generation. And what we have been calling absences all video are simply the audit's results, posted in flesh. There is one more turn here, and it's the one I want to leave almost until last, because it points the reading back at us. You're in the ledger too. Your body reads the same way theirs do, and once you have the knack, it's difficult to stop. Blood, thick with hemoglobin, a receipt for depth, for a body too dense and buried for the sea star's solution, recording an ancestry that committed long ago to being thick, warm, and fast. A stomach, a receipt for feast and famine, for meals worth guarding against, and gaps worth bridging, recording, as we said, a particular dirty, irregular, protein-heavy way of eating that your line never escaped or never needed to. Eyes, and the extravagant share of your brain that serves them, receipts for a bright world where things worth wanting and things worth fearing announce themselves at a distance, in detail. The brain itself, that 3-pound expense burning a fifth of everything you eat, the receipt for the most demanding clause any environment ever imposed on any animal, a world of moving rivals and moving prey and moving weather, in which the winner's the body that models what happens next. Every organ you have is a standing charge billed daily in oxygen and glucose, and you carry it for exactly one reason. Your world, this world, the bright, fast, dense, competitive, meal-scattered surface world, has never once, in the entire history of your lineage, stopped demanding it. You're paying that bill right now while you sit here listening to this. That's what the eyeless, brainless, stomachless, heartless, bloodless animals of the ocean have been telling us all along. Their bodies billed by different worlds, and the bill, everywhere, is itemized and paid exactly and nothing more. Somewhere in the last 2 hours, I suspect, one of these absences crossed a line for you, the way these things do. Maybe it was the vanished gene. The idea that a lineage can lose an ability so completely that no descendant ever can have it back. Maybe it was the box jelly learning a lesson with no brain to keep it in, or the severed green head grazing calmly on the far side of its own body, or the moment the tube worm seals its mouth like a ship welding its own hatches. Tell me which one in the comments, and tell me this too. Which organ do you suspect is next, somewhere, in some lineage, to turn out to be optional? I read the answers on these long videos, and the arguments down there are reliably better than anything I could have scripted. And if this kind of long, slow, honest tour through the strange parts of the ocean is something you want more of, subscribing is the plainest way to say so, and a like costs you a second and tells me the same. Here's the thought to take back to the surface. We're pattern-completing animals, and when we look at a sea star or a sponge, our instinct completes the pattern with pity. We see the missing brain, the missing eyes, the missing heart, and we read poverty. All video, that instinct has been wrong, and it has been wrong in one consistent direction. The absence was always the visible generosity of the place, or its indifference, or its permanence. Some fact about the surrounding water so stable, so old, and so reliable that entire categories of equipment could be returned unused and the deposit reclaimed and spent on tube feet, or glass, or slime, or eggs. So the last image of this video is the water column itself, the whole standing ocean, from the bright, agitated surface, where the demands are steep and the bodies are expensive, down through the twilight where eyes give out and the invoice is thin, down to the vents that pay in chemistry and the planes that pay in almost nothing, and everywhere in it, at every depth. bodies shaped like entries in an account book kept for 600 million years without one day's interruption. Every organ in that ocean is a demand still in force. Every absence is a demand withdrawn, a requirement canceled somewhere back down the long ledger of deep time. With the cancellation recorded permanently in the shape of a living body, the ocean keeps accounts, and it keeps them far more faithfully than it ever kept monuments. And when you finally read the accounts, the animals without eyes, without brains, without stomachs, without hearts, without blood, turn out to be the most legible pages in the book, because what's written on them is everything their world stopped asking for. Every absence down there is a record of something the water once demanded, and then stopped. The ocean is full of them, and it is still writing.